Hello Admirals and welcome back to my channel where I talk to you about Battlefleet Gothic, the Space Fleet game based in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. My voice is back to normal by the sounds of things. I've been sick last week, so videos have kind of been on a little bit of a hiatus, to be perfectly honest. But it's okay now, I think. So we're going to give this a go. In this video, I'm going to talk to you about Combat Air Patrol in BFG. What it is, how to use it, why to use it. Basically, it's putting fighters on a defensive cap around your ships to defend against enemy ordnance. So there's a tactical implications to that, but there are some rules around it you need to keep an eye on as well. So let's get into it. So first up, what actually is Combat Air Patrol? And essentially, ships that have ordnance bays can actually send out fighters, and what these fighters can do, they can be on this ship or they can travel to a friendly ship, and when they're in base contact with a friendly ship, they can elect to screen them against other enemy ordnance. So for example, this Mars class can elect, if this Devastation was friendly, can elect to put a cap or Combat Air Patrol on this ship, and that's protecting against other ordnance. Or it can even do it on itself if it wishes as well. It can always put one on itself too. And essentially that's what CAP or Combat Air Patrol actually is. So you have to have fighters. Fighters are the only ones that can actually do Combat Air Patrol, but ships that have a dual ordnance sort of designation, so Orcs, with their fighter bombers, or Thunderhawks from Space Marines, or Mantas from Tau, for example. They can be both, and they also can go on CAP as well. So you elect to, say, put fighters on CAP, and then one or more fighters on CAP can move in the movement phase with this ship. But if it does so if this Mars moves forward with its CAP, this fighter cannot then subsequently move in the ordnance phase. Essentially, you can't double move ordnance when it's on CAP. This is kind of to stop it being able to move, say, 25 centimeters with the Mars and then 30 centimeters speed with its usual range. So it's to prevent that sort of double moving. So it's to prevent, up to essentially 50, 60 centimeter moves in some instances with this ordnance. That's what it's trying to prevent. So if you move with the cap, it doesn't move again, essentially. So I've got one fighter on cap here, but I know you can have multiple fighters on cap on the base, but they're individual tokens. They're not one wave. They're never one wave. So you only ever put one token on a base. You could put more. You could put up to 4 if I wanted, or more, but they're all individual markers, which is important because what actually happens when they're on cap. So you've put a fighter on cap around your ship. What actually does it do? What does Combat Patrol actually do? And essentially all it does is kind of free screen, really, and it protects you against other enemy ordnance that may come into contact with the base of your ship. So this is move forward, this Mars move forward, say, against this Protector Tau cruiser, and they send out their ordnance and they fire out their torpedoes. The moment it comes into contact with that fighter base, they're both removed. And that's your cap screen. So what this helps prevent is it needing to, if it wasn't there, it would go through and then you'd roll on your turrets, which then potentially they could subsequently maybe follow up with a bomber wave where you can't use your turrets. So essentially having a fighter screen there means that while those are removed, subsequent waves of ordnance that come in can be protected by your turrets. And that's kind of the thought process of putting fighters on cap. Now, what happens if my friendly Devastation here fires at a ship and hits when there's fighters on cap? So if you rolled and you hit and you place a brass marker, then you would roll to see with dice to see on a 1d6, and I believe it's either a 1 or a 6, I can never remember, but on one or the other, this is destroyed because of the blast marker. But if it survives that dice roll, then you leave it in place. Simple as that. Now, I know I said this earlier, but you can't put bombers on cap. There has to be fighters. So, for example, you can't put a bomber on Cap and try and like see if a ship may come in contact with you and you throw the bomber out, that sort of thing. You can't use bombers as Cap. You have to use fighters or something that can operate as fighters, like I said earlier with Thunderhawks or fighter bombers, etc. So what if I don't want it on Cap anymore? Apart from being destroyed, there are two other ways in which this can be removed. So you can, at the beginning of your movement phase, elect to remove them from play, and then that's no longer on Cap. Or during the owning player's part of their opponent's ordnance phase, they can do that too. So in your movement phase or in your opponent's ordnance phase, they can remove it then as part of that. So they're the only two, apart from if it's destroyed. And if it's on Cap, and you have a friendly ship, for example, a friendly strike cruiser, that's what I'm looking for, right? If you send out your ordnance through this, or like say if it had torpedoes and it threw it out, this won't interrupt your friendly torpedoes, so it won't be impacted or ordnance. So this Cap is only against enemy ordnance, not against your own ones. So you don't have to, if you're traveling through, you don't have to worry about that. Now there are some kind of strange rule kind of sort of interactions that can occur here, especially with things like Orc fighter bombers or Thunderhawks. But essentially, if you have a Orc ship, for example, and it comes into contact, say it's trying to board this Mars class, it would move in its movement phase and go to board. So it would, base to base to board. This ship comes along with it and can potentially, if it comes into base to base contact with the enemy ship, it can actually then do an attack. But it doesn't do the attack straight away when it's making that move. It would do it in the ordnance phase. However, the opposite is true if it was on Cap with the Orc ship and say this Imperial cruiser decided to ram and it succeeded the ram or the ram rules, you can check out that video on my page, but decided to ram, then it would come into contact with the fighter bomber first before ramming, so it would then do the actual bombing run first, immediately as per those rules, before then continuing on to do its ram maneuver. So there is a little bit of, it's the same with Thunderhawks. If they were on it, if they moved in, they would do the attack in the ordnance phase, but if they were attacked as part of that, maybe borders, they would do it then immediately because the base came into contact. So you've got to keep an eye on who initiates the base-to-base in action first, essentially, is kind of where it flows. And that's kind of it for Combat Air Patrol. Essentially, you put fighters and only fighters that can act as them on a friendly ship or your own ship as essentially as a protection against other ordnance. And where tactically it kind of can be useful is if you're concerned, if you think that you might be completely under the cosh with ordnance. So, for example, an Imperial fleet is undergunned against a Tau fleet in ordnance. So I would potentially use capping on my Imperial ships to protect them against those multiple waves of bombers and then torpedoes or vice versa. So it ideally prevents you not being able to use your turrets on one of those ordnance screens. So it's a good screening tool, I think, and good if you're, I think, and very useful if you aren't going to be able to win that that ordnance superiority part of the game. It's a good way to defend against that. And if you've got like one or two ordnance on cap around your key ships, it kind of then makes the opponent try and think, well, do I really want to try and lose? It reduces down. You typically would expect them to put in a couple of fighters to remove that, and then the bomber wave, and then potentially your turrets are going to deal with it, and maybe then they follow up with torpedoes, but you trust your 6-inch prow potentially to deal with that, things like that. So 6-inch, 6+ armor prow. But it's the same with other fleets and things like that. So if you're Chaos and you're trying to, up against Tyranids or Tau again, and you're trying to protect, it's very much a good defensive tool to try and keep your ships from being constantly hit by waves of ordnance, it's a good way, and it makes them think about which is the target priority, and it expends a portion of their ordnance and their attack in trying to deal with it. They have to get rid of that. If they want to put torpedoes through, they have to put fighters in, which reduces down the number of bomber waves that they can put into you. So it's all about kind of that ebb and flow, if that makes sense. It's a really good defensive tool, I feel. I do it as a bit of a protection against those larger ordnance fleets, or if I feel I might be under the cosh a little bit with it, rather than trying to throw out my own ordnance that can potentially be picked off either through shooting or maybe picked off by one or two fighter screens of their own. Then having it on your ship that you can recall in your movement phase when you want, and then put out again in the subsequent ordnance kind of phase, kind of lends you that sort of tactical side of things. So it kind of adds to that sort of defensive tactics, I suppose. So really good way of protecting yourself, I feel. So I hope that makes sense. But really good kind of defensive if you're a bit nervous about being overwhelmed by your enemy's ordnance. Really good tactical tool in defense if you're under the pump.
There you have it, Admirals. That is the Combat Air Patrol. There's some eccentricities to it, like anything in these games, but a really good tactical option. If you feel like you're on a bit of the back foot, it's a good way of putting multiple caps, fighters on your ships to protect against large waves of fighters, bombers, Thunderhawks, torpedoes, and all that sort of stuff. So a really useful tool. It's if you have limited amounts of ordnance, it can really help protect against your ships being constantly hit and by waves of ordnance. So, and you can use it kind of as a protective screen as you move through the game and through the turns. So really valuable to use. I hope that's useful to you, Admirals. Let me know your ideas on the Combat Air Patrol and its mechanics in the comments. As ever, like, subscribe, all that fun and games. And I'll see you in the next video.